In the 2017-18 NBA season, the Atlanta Hawks had a historically bad season for their franchise, winning just 24 games, their 5th lowest win total in franchise history. They didn't have any bona fide stars or young up-and-coming players that you could be excited to build with for your future. Maybe John Collins, who had a better than expected rookie season, but for the most part, this was a team that didn't have any prospects or pieces to build around. But losing that many games and finishing dead last in the East wasn't all that bad, because it would position the Hawks to land a top lottery pick that was projected to be a stacked draft class with the likes of DeAndre Ayton, Luka Doncic, Trae Young, Mikal Bridges, SGA. And when the Hawks landed the number 3 pick in the draft, despite the Kings jumping up in the draft lottery for the number 2 pick, they actually ended up still getting lucky by way of the Sacramento Kings' incompetence in taking Marvin Bagley number 2 overall. And the Hawks had right in front of them what it was expected to be a once-in-a-generation level talent, a kid who had been dominating the EuroLeague, winning the league MVP as a teenager over other grown professionals. Luka Doncic was theirs for the taking. And while they did ultimately select Luka, they decided to trade down in the draft to move to number 5, a pick held by the Dallas Mavericks, which the Hawks would use to select Trae Young, a guy who they had their eye on from the beginning. And as compensation for sending the Mavs the number 3 pick, the Mavs would then trade their first-round pick in the upcoming draft in 2019, which the Hawks would later use to select Cam Reddish with the 10th overall pick. This was, of course, the Hawks' second lottery pick in that draft, and also having the number 4 pick. But here's the thing. While everyone likes to talk about how badly the Hawks screwed up and not just taking Luka and sticking with him instead of trading for Trae Young, and how that will always be one of the biggest draft night trades that a team wishes they could take back, I would actually argue that it's not just that trade alone that has led to the current state of the Atlanta Hawks and seeing the mess of the roster before us. It's the multitude of missteps, poor decisions, and transactions that has quite frankly set this franchise back for years. And there's really only one way the Hawks can conceivably fix this mess and turn things around before it's too late. How, you might ask? Well, let's talk about it. But first, a big shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. If you haven't heard of Underdog already, let me tell you about their platform real quick, because I absolutely love this app. It's super easy to use. And if you're like me and you like making predictions, maybe want to win a little money on the side, then this is it. My personal favorite that I use on the app is NBA Pick'ems. They have higher or lower on most player stats for any game. Just pick higher or lower on a given player stat for their upcoming game, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night if you do 5 Pick'ems and you get them all right. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel an exclusive offer. If you use the promo code AND1HOOPS, all one word, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Who doesn't want free money, right? It's really that easy. It's also a great way to support the channel. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested, and let me know what picks you guys end up making. Now, while I think we all can agree, unless you're just an incredibly biased Hawks fan, that trading Luka Doncic for Trae Young on draft night was a mistake. Now, when it happened, it didn't seem so bad, right? Because at the time, while most assumed Luka and his game would translate perfectly in the NBA and he would go on to be a star level player, there was still some uncertainty of, is this just going to be another one of those amazing EuroLeague players whose game doesn't really take off in the NBA, kind of like a Ricky Rubio, who was incredibly hyped when he was 18 and was taking that league by storm, and when he came to the NBA, he was decent, but he never really took off and became a star level player in the league. And the other thing was the Hawks, I mean, they got that first round pick in the deal and only had to move back 2 spots in the draft to get the guy they had their eye on in Trae Young, a guy they knew was a stretch to take at number 3. No one had Young that high on their mock draft boards, so instead you get a first round pick in the deal to get the guy that you wanted. Like, really, it wasn't that bad of a trade at that time. And let's also not downplay the fact that Trae Young would go on to be one of the best scorers in the game of basketball, an elite level playmaker, and an all-star player himself. Like, let's not minimize that as if the Hawks traded Luka and got a bust in return. You could argue Trae has actually exceeded expectations when a lot of people thought he was going to underwhelm in the NBA and would be too small to be effective. But is Trae Young a top 10, top 5 player in the NBA like Luka at such a young age? No, he's not. And as I mentioned, it's not the straight swap of Luka for Trae that really set the Hawks back. And we'll even set aside the fact that they could have even traded in the draft to get Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, because SGA fell far in the lottery anyway. But it's more so the fact that they didn't make use of the first round pick they got in the deal for Luka, and taking Cam Reddish, who they later would have to move for pennies on the dollar in a trade. Taking Reddish over guys like Cam Johnson and Tyler Hero, with the fact that they took DeAndre Hunter 4th overall in that draft, and then also giving him a big payday extension later on? Or how about taking Okongwu in the following draft, 6th overall, ahead of Tyrese Halliburton or even Devin Vassell? Or of course, trading 3 first-round picks for Dejounte Murray, 2 of those picks being unprotected that they owe to the Spurs. Now look, while you could argue all of these moves were bad in hindsight, you can't necessarily say that they were poor decisions at that time, because you don't know what players are truly going to develop into at the time that they're drafted, or if they'll pan out and fit with the rest of the roster in a given trade. But the biggest thing for the Atlanta Hawks that has set their franchise back for years to come, I would even argue a decade's worth, and I know it may sound odd, but it was actually going to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2021. The year the Hawks went to the Eastern Conference Finals, it was this incredible Cinderella story, a Hawks team that started off the season poorly, I might add, in 2020, so bad that they had to fire their coach and had Nate McMillan come in. After McMillan took over, the Hawks turned their season around, going 27-11 to finish off the year after starting 14-20. They would work their way up to the 5th seed in the East, and while most thought they would get taken out in the first round, they surprised the NBA world in not only beating the Knicks handily in 5 games, but then they would go on to take out the number 1 seeded Philadelphia 76ers in 7 games, beating Philly on their own home court in Game 7, a Sixers team that was thought to be one of the title favorites that year. And hell, even in the conference finals, they gave the Bucks a run for their money, taking it to 6 games to the eventual NBA champions. Like really, that run was nothing short of amazing for a team that no one would have predicted to get that far at the start of the season. And by the Hawks having so much success that season, it gave them this false sense of belief that they were right there. They were right there for a shot at the title. If they could beat the Sixers and go toe-to-toe with the Bucks, and they had a younger team with players that hadn't even entered their primes yet, why couldn't they be on a path to being one of the best teams in the league? The problem, though, is not all runs like that are sustainable. First and foremost, as good as the Hawks were, they were severely lacking defensively. Trae Young was getting away with a massive amount of foul baiting, which the league would then go on to alter the rules of foul baiting. They played a Knicks team that collapsed in the playoffs, who hadn't been there in over a decade, and while beating the Sixers was impressive, the Sixers had been notorious, and that still remains the case to this day, for choking in the playoffs. And of course, who could forget Ben Simmons crumbling in that series? But because the Hawks thought they were right there on a path of being a title team, and with Trae Young being that franchise player to build around to get them there, they moved way too quickly, thinking they were better than they actually were. The fact of the matter is, teams started to figure out Trae Young. They learned how to guard him better, they learned not to fall for his attempts to draw contact to get to the line, and they learned to just attack him on the defensive end, because Trae wasn't stopping anyone. And wouldn't you know it, the following season after the conference finals run, the Hawks would disappoint, finishing the year 9th in the East. They made it into the playoffs by way of the play-in, otherwise they would have missed the playoffs entirely, but then would get beat down in the first round by the Miami Heat. So what did the Hawks do? They panicked. Well, we've got to do something. We've got this franchise player in our hands. We went to the conference finals and then slid majorly this past season. We've got to get Trae some help, and we need someone in the backcourt with him that will mask his defensive deficiencies. So what do? They made an all-in type move to acquire Dejounte Murray, who was coming off an all-star season in San Antonio. And while I don't mean for this to come off as disrespect to Murray, because I actually love his game and think he's one of the better two-way players in the game of basketball, but Murray is not a player you trade 3 first-round picks for. I know Gobert that same offseason would later get moved for 4 and really 5 if you include Walker Kessler, 5 first-round picks, but even Gobert shouldn't have gone for that many picks either. The biggest difference, though, is look at where the Wolves are now compared to the Atlanta Hawks. And the Hawks, a team that could very well be on their way to the lottery, both for now and for the foreseeable future, are going to be sending out unprotected picks to the Spurs. 3 first-round picks for what I would call a fringe-level all-star player, and a fringe all-star player who doesn't fit well alongside Trae Young, because Murray thrives more with the ball in his hands and playing point guard over the two. And now you're in a situation where the Hawks are sitting 10th in the Eastern Conference. They're getting blown out of games, not even looking competitive. Guys are visibly frustrated. And now, just after trading for Dejounte Murray a year and a half later, reports are now out that the Hawks are looking to move on from Murray, which they'll most surely not get that kind of return that they had to pay to get him. But if you're the Atlanta Hawks, an over-the-cap team that doesn't have much wiggle room to work with for the future, with guys like Young, Hunter, Bogdanovich, Murray, and Okongwu all locked up on pretty sizable deals for the next 3 to 4 seasons after this one, the best course of action, rather than trying to salvage what they have and see if they can magically turn things around or just do a retool around Trae Young and see if they can get back on track to where they were in 2021, the best course of action is to tear this roster down. And yes, that also means trading away Trae Young. You see, while everyone is focusing on trading Dejounte Murray because he's still a high-level player in his prime, and the thought is, well, Murray just didn't fit well with Trae. The problem is the Hawks will continue to just set themselves back further and further if they try to build around Trae Young. Trae Young is your franchise player. Your number one option isn't winning you a championship. Like, as good as Trae Young is, and he is an elite player, he's still not that guy. He's not Steph Curry, as much as Hawks fans would like to think that he is. And the sooner the front office recognizes that and accepts the fact that he's not that player, the better. Because the longer they kick the can down the road, the more coaches they fire, the more roster adjustments they make to get the right pieces around Trae, and they still don't work, the lower and lower Trae's value is going to be. Right now, you can get a big haul for Trae Young, who's only 25. His contract isn't very favorable on a max deal, but he's a big enough name and enough of an offensive juggernaut that you could secure multiple first-round picks and potentially some young players for. And if you're trading Young, you might as well just start over. Get maximum value for guys like Murray, Bogdanovich, Capella. You start over now and build for the future, because switching it up and getting different pieces around Trae isn't going to make you that much better. And yes, tanking being bad doesn't really favor them when they owe some of their picks to the Spurs, but if they move all of their highest valued assets, the hope is that they would be able to obtain a fair amount of draft capital in return to set them up for the future. So I hate to say it, and I know Hawks fans are going to go nuts on me in the comments, but what really has set this franchise back is building around Trae Young and thinking that he was going to be the player that gets them multiple championships after this false sense of hope in that 2021 playoff run. Let me know what you guys think though, and what do you think the Hawks should do to save their season? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.